Right. So today we're on our day 12. We're going to talk about how to identify our triggers, to know what a trigger even is, what are some of our needs in our life, some basic emotional needs, and we all have different ones. We're going to draw comparisons between our triggers and our emotional needs. So certain things will trigger people but won't trigger other people. And we're going to be able to recognize signs in our body that we are experiencing a trigger. That way we can identify how we can react. So the first step is to notice what's happening with our body if we're getting triggered by something, or what's happening in our mind. So what is a trigger in the first place? What does that even mean? Like, in our day and society, you probably have heard the word before. And it is a very serious thing, as much as people sometimes make light of what triggers are. So a trigger in psychology is any kind of stimulus. So it can be a smell, a sound, or a sight, like anything you can experience that triggers feelings of trauma. So a past event, we start to think about a past event because that sight, smell, sound comes up. So people typically use this term when describing PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Not everybody who experiences or is triggered by something has PTSD, and vice versa. Maybe someone with PTSD kind of has their, maybe they experience triggers, but they might know how to react to them, or they might take medication for their PTSD. So it's important to recognize that everybody's different. So this is just a screen that shows some examples of triggers for people. So it could be a date where loss or trauma occurred, something frightening that shows up on the news, having too much to do or feeling overwhelmed. There could be family friction, and that brings about past memories. The end of a relationship can be a trigger. Spending too much time alone, criticism, being teased or put down, life changes, financial problems, being physically ill can be a trigger. So you might be like, wait, how is that? If I'm a person that maybe had a really bad experience when I was really sick in my past, maybe my childhood, I got sick a lot. So then when I'm an adult and I get physically ill, maybe that reminds me of those times and it's hard for me. Sexual harassment can be a trigger. Honestly, even just sex, I know you're like, what? But we're in health class. So for some people, anything sex related can be a trigger if they have had a sexual abuse scenario or harassment of any sort. Being yelled at can be a trigger, or aggressive sounding noises, especially for veterans. Hearing certain noises can be a trigger, and it takes them back to the time or place where they felt unsafe. And being around someone who has treated us badly in our past, smells, tastes, or noises. This list is very small. I'm sure that everybody has examples of things that affect them. Maybe not to the point of being a trigger, but I'm sure this list could be a little bit bigger depending on the person. A lot of times our triggers can relate to emotional needs. So for instance, if in your childhood a certain emotional need was not fulfilled, when you have a similar experience come up in your adult life or your teenage life, you can feel potentially triggered. So an example that I like to give people is, let's say as a child, you grew up and you were kind of like ripped apart for everything. Maybe nothing was good enough, or there was just a lot of judgment. Your emotional need of needing to feel loved, supported, etc., may not have been fulfilled. So the trigger could be, I felt judged, but the emotional need was, I really needed to feel accepted. So nothing's wrong with you if things trigger you. Unfortunately, we all experience some forms of childhood trauma, some of us more so than others. So just keeping that in mind. Physical signs of triggers in the body. These are just some that people have claimed. So these come from people who struggle with PTSD or just people who know they experience a trigger. Some people get sweaty, some people get cold and clammy, other people shake or get chills, heart racing, because as we know, when you're stressed, your body has to work harder to recover, right? So that one small part in the brain called the amygdala, that fight, flight, or freeze, when you have a trigger, that amygdala is really going. Okay, so all those fight, flight, or freeze responses. You guys remember when we did that thing with the X's on our body, like we moved the X over the A's on that one activity. So we talked about where we feel our stress in our body. A trigger definitely causes stress or can. So we're going to talk today about how can we begin to manage them. A lot of people get angry, lonely, fearful, sad. They might feel deep shame, emptiness, or forgetfulness. These are all mental or emotional responses to triggers. So avoiding our triggers is not possible all the time. So sometimes that person, place, thing, event will come up again in the future or something similar. That brings us back to a time in our past, and that time may be hard for us to think about. So just recognizing that we can't always avoid the trigger, but healing can start to happen when we recognize that we have a trigger happening and we change up the way we react. So we can move through the pain by identifying our triggers, reaching out for help if we need it or someone to talk to, taking some of those deep breaths we learned about, like the extended exhale, the 4-7-8 breath, depending on the person, or the 3-part breath. Those are all really calming breaths. I feel like I forgot one. The square breathing, the one where we breathe in for 4, pause for 4, out for 4, and then we pause. All of those are really helpful. So noticing that when a trigger happens, and a trigger could be something that comes up that our brain starts to replay the old memory, and it may not even be a real threat, but our brain perceives it to be a real threat because it's similar to a past experience, place, person, or thing. So the key thing is to recognize it's happening, to take a deep breath and count to 10. Doing something you enjoy that helps you kind of escape for a second can be helpful. So drawing, reading, or writing. Some people feel like it's helpful to talk. Some people feel like it's more helpful to go on a run or to work out. I like yoga. So just taking time to process it in the way that you need to. Knowing that, I mean, these things are going to happen, but you get to choose if you're going to let your brain continue to go back to that place. There are a lot of meditations too that are helpful for triggers. So usually I go with more of a grounding meditation. So like visualization, visualizing a peaceful place where you feel safe. Sometimes it's helpful after a while of meditation to go into the chaos. So you can do a full catastrophe meditation, but that would be after some more of the grounding practices first. So today what you guys are going to work on, and you can revisit those slides to help you, is there is responses to triggers Google Doc and an emotional needs Google Doc. And since we're on a shortened schedule today, I'm going to have you skip the other two activities. Obviously, if you're watching this as a replay in the future, you'd want to clarify that. But the first document kind of just goes through what happens in your physical body, energetic, mental and emotional bodies in terms of stress. So this is going to be very similar to what we did a week or two ago. And the second document, this is one of my favorite documents. And remember, this is completely confidential, but you're going to identify what are your top 5 triggers. So things that make you angry, scared, lonely, depressed, sad, anxious, or guilty. And remember, the trigger doesn't have to be anything super big. I had a student once that had a bad situation, or let's put it this way. They didn't have a comfortable situation with one of their guardians, and their guardian really liked cream soda or something. So every time they saw that drink, that was a trigger for them. So when you're thinking about what your triggers are, they don't have to be anything super deep, and you don't even have to explain to me why they're triggers. It's just recognizing that they are, because they remind you of that person, place, event, or thing. Does that make sense? So a trigger can be something simple like a food. Yeah, perfect. So step 2, you have to scroll down, but these are all like a list of emotional needs. So we all have different values or different ways we value these. So you're going to rank on a scale of 1 to 10 how important these things are to you. And the ones that have the highest numbers are your top 5 emotional needs. So you're going to list those out down here. And so for the very bottom, you pretty much only have to do this with a sentence. And I wrote an example, but you're going to look at what your trigger is, and then you're going to write out how it makes you feel. And it could just be one word. You don't have to put a whole lot. And then you're going to write about what you need in order to feel comfortable or in control, or just whatever your need is. So one of my triggers was when life changes without much warning, I feel anxious. I have a feeling that comes from moving around a lot as a kid and unpredictability. So one of my needs that may not be any of you guys is I need predictability, or to feel like I'm in control. So that's kind of how you're gonna write about that. So that is essentially what I'm gonna have you guys work on today. And then if you get questions, you